Thank you all for this excellent program. Before we got started, I was kind of joking with Dr. Austin about Mississippi and Espy's bid for election here. And this is primarily because I have these Mississippi blinders on. I was, raised here in Mississippi. I'm back in Mississippi teaching, and you have to go back and look at the origin of the democracy that we tried to build here in Mississippi. So if you go back to 1890, we revised our Constitution, and we led the charge, amongst all Southern states to prevent blacks from voting. And there are quotes out there that was the reason that the Constitution was revised. And then we get to 1965. In 1964, the registration amongst blacks was about 6.7. Immediately after the passage of the Voting Rights Act, it was 59%. And I bring all this up. I know you all know this, but I bring all this up to set up the stage for Espy's bid. So there was a Supreme Court case, Connor versus Johnson, that was filed in 1966. And it was filed because Mississippi had multi-member districts immediately after the passage of the Voting Rights Act. And so it took greater numbers for blacks to win, although they constituted more than 40% of the state. They could not elect a candidate of their choice, particularly at the congressional level. And then in 1979, after about three back and forth cases to the Supreme Court, they finally gave a favorable ruling in 1979. And in that year, blacks went from 4 black elected officials to 14 overnight. So we moved to 1986. 1986 is when Mike Espy gets elected. He gets elected because they created a majority black district. Now, this is extremely important, particularly because it's Mississippi. This is one case where we were ahead of the curve. In 1986, we had Thornburg versus Jingles. And in that case, it actually set precedent for these states to, increase the number of black majorities districts. But we in Mississippi had already created a district so that Mike Espy could win. Mike Espy ran a deracialized campaign. He got the crossover vote, even though it was a majority black district. He was known thereafter as, a moderate candidate. But one thing when he was in office after the 90s census, he wanted to minimize that district or decrease the number of blacks in that district. And no other black person probably could have won that district other than Mike Espy had it been changed. Espy goes on to be Secretary of Agriculture. There was a $20 million witch hunt on him, and he did survive that. So fast forward to 2018, Thad Cochran resigns. It set the stage for Mike Espy to run. Now, mind you, Mike Espy was Secretary of Agriculture for the country. The woman that he ran against was the Commissioner for Agriculture in the state of Mississippi. So clearly he had the qualifications. And during that same year, Espy couldn't run a deracialized campaign because she racialized it. So that was a contextual effect where, you can try, but since she racialized it, it was on the table. She said that, she would be on the front row of a hanging if the person who supported her was there. And so that, gained a lot of traction. Espy, talks about gaining 46% of the vote. Well, 46% of the vote is okay, but when you look at the raw numbers, that's when it becomes problematic. Here in Mississippi, I have this 60%, 40% rule. On average, a black person or a progressive or a Democrat who runs for statewide office will get roughly 40% of the black vote, and that's comparable to the population here, roughly 38% in terms of voting age population. But when you look at the numbers, when you go back and look at Obama's numbers, and let's just start with Espy and Senior Hyde Smith. In that election, Espy lost 490,000 to 420,000. In 2016, Trump won 700,000 to 485,000. So I could go on and, talk about Obama's unprecedented numbers, but if we just stop at Trump's number, he's at 700,000, which was lower than it was in 2012, the vote for the Republican, that is. So that means that Espy has to go from 420 to 700,000. And that's what's problematic right now. But, because of George Floyd's death, and he's been, plowing ahead with these race-specific campaigns. His advertisements, he has about $4 million in the coffer compared to her about $1.5 million. So he did go off the DNC and said that they were not supporting him. And then Obama had an endorsement and others had endorsements. But then in closing, I need to talk about real quick the initiatives. So here in Mississippi, we had an initiative back in 2015, and it was simply to fully fund our education. Go figure. They hadn't fully funded the education budget in about 15 years. So there was an initiative on the ballot asking whether or not they would, to ask the voters. And what the legislators did, they went in and put a two-step process where you had to make one decision, which was confusing, and then come back and make another decision. Well, the same thing is happening now. We have one initiative on the ballot is marijuana for medicinal purposes. They went in and they put two parts to that. Also, we have our flag on the initiative. The flag, we did get rid of the flag, but it's through the legislative process. And, going back to 2001, when they voted on the referendum to get rid of the flag, it was 65%, 35%, 65% to keep the old flag. So I'm not I'm not convinced that those numbers will change much, but, it's a new day and Mississippi has changed a little. And so I'll stop there and thank you so much.